Hey everyone, I'm Rather Incoherent, and today I'm going to rank all the Cluevers in Arkham Horror. Yesterday we ranked all the fighters, and I'm going to be reiterating that introduction to contextualize this tier list. The reason I'm making two separate tier lists is because I don't think that you can meaningfully compare fighters and Cluevers. They're apples and oranges, they belong in different tier lists. Second, this tier list is based on how powerful I perceive the cards to be when played optimally, which is to say, I'm judging them specifically based on how I think they're going to be played if you're trying to make them strong, not on any sort of general power level. And to fill you in on how much experience I have with the game, I have played the game for about 3/4 of a year now. As a consequence, I fully expect this tier list to change over time as I get more experience with the game. This is all subjective to begin with, so even though I'm trying to rank them according to how powerful they are, that's something that I'm subjectively judging to the best of my ability. And to judge any sort of power level, we have to establish how I'm playing them. I play almost strictly 2 to 3 player multiplayer with the taboo list on standard difficulty. That's what I'm judging these characters by, and I frankly don't have enough experience to judge them in any other form than this. And lastly, on the subject of flex characters, because if there's only a fighter and a Cluever tier list, where do flex characters go? Jim Culver might be bad, but he could go fighter or Cluever, so how do I determine where I put him? And the answer is I make a judgment decision based on how I think that character is tilted. Very few flex characters are equally capable of doing fighting and clue finding. So I just make a decision about which one I think the character is better at doing and put them on that tier list. As you can see, I've put a lot more characters on my Cluever tier list than my fighter tier list, but that's really not because of flex. There's definitely more mystics on this tier list, but only by 2. And almost everyone else on this tier list, with the exception of Stella Clark, is actually just like relatively clearly a Cluever. But I'll talk about why I view certain characters as fulfilling certain roles when we come to them. Let's start talking about the investigators themselves. Before I talk about any role, I always want to talk about what the role means. An F-tier character doesn't function. It's a Cluever that barely gets clues, a fighter that can't kill enemies. And there are no non-functional investigators in the game. The reason I say this is because I want to take a moment to draw attention to the fact that Arkham Horror is actually really well made. There are very few bad characters, no genuinely unplayable characters, and most of the investigators are somewhere between good and great. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said about D tier. D tier is for characters that are genuinely and obviously bad. No matter how you try, the best you're going to get out of a D tier investigator is a functional investigator. You look at them, you immediately see the glaring weaknesses, and before you've even compared them directly to somebody else, you know you want to play someone else. And unfortunately, despite massive improvements in the most recent expansion, Lola Hayes has not climbed out of D tier. Everyone knew Lola Hayes was getting a D tier on my tier list, because that's the assumption you go into every tier list with. I think forced learning actually makes Lola Hayes much better. And the reason I think this is because due to the fact that she has to stay outside of yellow to function as a Cluever, she wants to run the passive book boost on things like Magnifying Glass, Kirby, and Milan, so she can't stay in yellow for risk of discarding them when she draws her weakness. That also really limits Lola's ability to run draw, so forced learning is really helpful, and then that in turn gives you access to a bunch of red events that discard themselves and then gain benefits that you previously wouldn't have been able to justify playing. So yes, Lola has improved a lot with forced learning. She's almost a C tier investigator. She's almost just on the bad side of mediocre. But she's still just terrible. She's functional now. She's not an F tier investigator. I don't think she has been for a while, but there's no reason to pick Lola over anyone else. Moving up to the C tier, as I implied with Lola, we're now talking about characters that are not bad, but mediocre. They either have weaknesses that weigh them down, or more likely, a lack of any real meaningful strength that would make you feel compelled to pick them over their competitors. There is no better poster child for that statement than Father Mateo. He is basically just every other mystic, but worse. Even if you build a blessed deck for him, it doesn't look very compelling. What he does is just the mystic thing, but with only 4 head and a terrible card pool. Now, the mystic thing is really strong. I'm not going to pretend for a second that mystics don't have amazing cards and inherent strengths, but you'd be hard-pressed to find a mystic less competent than Father Mateo. But there is another mystic I'm putting right beside him. It's Jim Culver. I want to agree to the mindset that Jim Culver is good because of his consistency. You use your yellow cards for like Deep Knowledge to compensate for Purple's bad draw, and Hawkeye Folding Camera to boost your head up to a 5-head mystic, and he's just a consistent purple character. But I can't do that. Like, every other purple character is getting something from their card pool and their abilities, and Jim is getting almost nothing. He's not quite the bottom, that's Father Mateo in my eyes, but he's damn close. And honestly, on a day, you might convince me or find me saying that these two are swapped. Father Mateo's once per game ability is really good. When I was doing the work to make this tier list before I started, I had Father Mateo worse than Jim Culver, and right now, I don't think that Deep Knowledges and Hawkeye folding cameras make up for that ability. And then even as I say that, I flip back again, and I'm like, no, of course they do. But these two characters are both just baseline mystics. They are not doing anything special. The only reason they're viable is because the mystic card pool is really good, and they have 4 in the only stat that matters for a mystic. Next up, we have a character that I want to be wrong about. I want Patrice Hathaway to be much better than I think she is. I think the optimal way to build her is the high skills deck that everyone talks about, the one with Cornered and St. Hubert's Key. You use 6 cents to find clues and just throw all your skills out every turn, and it looks really compelling. And then at the end of the day, like, what I feel I've made is a deck that if it jumps through a bunch of hoops can investigate 3 times in a turn. And like, yeah, consistently investigating 3 times successfully every turn, that's pretty good, but that's literally all Patrice does, it feels like. And that really sucks. She makes good use of winging it. I'm not going to pretend she doesn't. But that is not enough to get her any higher than the bottom of the barrel mystics. And speaking of doing one thing well enough to get to decently high in C tier, but no higher, let's talk about Parallel Daisy. She is a Seeker, or like 4/6 of a Seeker. She only has access to Seeker 0 to 3, with 5 book. It's really hard to make her into an unplayable character, but man, did Fantasy Flight try. Starting with a base of 1 head and I believe 5 sanity before she gets tomes in play to scale those numbers up is brutal. Her ability, rather than being like once per turn use of Old Book of Lore to have some of the best scry and draw in the game, is a once per game effect that is almost impossible to build a deck that meaningfully capitalizes on. Her card pool, she lost Seeker 4 and 5, so she lost some of the craziest cards available to Seeker. And a big one would be Abigail. Abigail Foreman, the card that, you know, lets you use books multiple times. That's a 4 experience Seeker card that Parallel Daisy loses. She also loses all her purple cards. She loses Warded Protection level 2 and Enraptured, which she was able to use to keep a pendant in the Queen rolling forever, and Promise of Power. And at that point, can you even run Practice Makes Perfect anymore? And in exchange, she basically just got Astronomical Atlas. And don't get me wrong, Astronomical Atlas is really good. But just, God, this is Daisy Walker with all the good things ripped out of her deck. But even so, a 5-book Seeker can do some serious work. This might be the worst 5-book Seeker you can make, but it's still a 5-book Seeker. Joe Diamond is another Seeker that is doing a great disservice to their class by somehow getting 2 of them ranked into the C tier. I'm going to spoil the tier list for you a bit and tell you that I generally rank Seekers very highly. So the fact that of the 6 characters we've ranked, 2 of them at the bottom 6 are Seekers is hilarious to me. Joe Diamond's stat line is terrible. He can't really be built to effectively both fight and use his book. I want that to be wrong. I want to see a deck where I've been convinced otherwise, but every Flex Joe I see just looks terrible to me. And you can build a Joe Diamond deck that has actually like got unique things to it. You can build a Hunch deck filled with draw cards and run a pretty mean big hand Cluever Joe Diamond. But even doing that, you've got to dedicate a lot of card slots to dealing with your 2/2 defensive stats. He's not bad. He's actually at the very top of C tier. He's almost not even mediocre. He's almost good. But man, the glaring weaknesses of his defensive stats in exchange for a 4/5 that he really struggles to meaningfully use just weighs him down so much. And honestly, the most important thing he gets from his blue card pool is taking the initiative to deal with his terrible defensive stats. And that's just a sad state of affairs. Moving on to B tier, we're now talking about investigators that are good, but they're not great. They have clear problems. Whether it's that they're on the weaker side of good, or they have clear weaknesses weighing them down, or some form of jank making them difficult to play, B tier characters are just good. They're not so clearly outshined as their C tier compatriots, but they're just good, and you can do a lot better than B tier. And this might be the first seriously hot take of the tier list, but this is where I'm going to place Parallel Agnes. I want to think Parallel Agnes is a broken character. I want to believe that, but I look at the decks I build for her and the decks other people have built for her, and the game I playtested her, both level 0 and in-game full deck. She just feels like she desperately wants draw that she just doesn't have access to. She has access to a lot of cool cards and potentially powerful combos, and ultimately, most of the time I just feel like I'm playing Agnes without the red cards. Because without a shitload of draw to make use of her ability more often, which mono purple doesn't get, I don't have an ability to capitalize on what she's trying to do, and that sucks. Her method of recurring events is only even relevant as something more than economy if I have the draw to find them again. Unfortunately, Parallel Agnes isn't the only parallel character disappointing me at the bottom of B tier. We've also got to talk about Skids O'Toole. Don't get me wrong, he's a lot better than the original Skids. He's got the same terrible stat line, but giving him access to Luckies as a card pool instead of blue, which tilts him thoroughly away from having to try to be a fighter, and giving him the gambling ability to generate a little bit of economy and this really cool ability to basically take a guaranteed skill test at the beginning of his turn to trigger something like nimble or manual dexterity or momentum. All of that's really, really cool. It puts him in a better game space to be a flex character as opposed to a janky sort of bad fighter. It puts him in a better position to be a big money deck, which is... Let's talk about big money decks. This has to happen in every video where I'm talking about the power of green characters, so let's do it now. Big money decks are busted. In a week or so, I'll probably make an archetype video about big money decks where I go into this at great detail, but to quickly summarize it, big money decks simultaneously help characters deal with the Mythos deck, which green characters tend to struggle with, as well as giving you the ability to guarantee important skill checks on your turn, help you reliably find any other card in your deck that was core to your game plan via double-double and easy marks, and black markets, which you are going to want to run in pretty much every big money deck. And then on top of that, you already needed to run several cards for these purposes. You were running cards to deal with your bad head score and your bad brains. You were running cards to deal with your economy and to pay for Leo DeLuca. The opportunity cost of big money is so low. On this tier list, let me briefly double check this. Yeah, every single green character I talk about, I'm talking about a big money character. That was actually true on the other tier lists too, but it didn't really impact what I was saying about Winifred's problems or about Skids being terrible. Parallel Skids, however, since he's building himself into just like make your own Jenny Barnes, but better, is actually doing a really good thing here. I say but better. We'll talk about like Jenny Barnes isn't on the tier list yet in a while. If you've watched my Path to Arcosa campaign, though, you know why she's not here yet. It's a single card. Back to Parallel Skids, though. Having a smaller deck with access to Lucky as one of his cards allows him to play a just more reliable big money deck. It's what his ability wants him to do anyway. And he's able to run Gias like all the other big money characters do, to just take a million checks at very high numbers. Or instead, he can just run the skills that synergize with his ability and do a different powerful thing. The reason I don't rate Skids O'Toole higher than this is because he still has Skids O'Toole's stat line, parallel or not. He's working with some terrible numbers in the first few scenarios, and until he has some experience to shore up those weaknesses, it's going to be a rough and bumpy ride. Also, I have repeatedly mentioned that Lucky is a good card that goes in his deck, but also, Lucky is not a reason to pick an Investigator, and it's damn close to all his card pool gives him. Next up, let's talk about a character where literally no matter where I place him, it's going to be controversial. It's Preston Fairmont. Preston Fairmont's decks can be accurately summarized as Mariner's Compass, Lola Santiago, and 26 other cards. Preston Fairmont decks have a bunch of cards that really don't matter. There are obviously optimal and suboptimal choices to be made here, but the entire strength of Preston Fairmont is his ability to use Family Inheritance to just brute force a couple of good cards into insane performances. Preston Fairmont's entire purpose in the game is to get insane value out of weird ways his ability interacts with other cards. As a big money Cluever using the Hoarder archetype, his base ones just ruin him so much that he's not able to go down the same path. And generally speaking, his base ones just ruin him. They hold him back so much. But the level to which he abuses cards like Lola or Mariner's Compass with Streetwise and using his family inheritance to pretend that he's actually poor, whatever weird jank combo you build your Preston Fairmont deck around abusing, you abuse it so well that I can't put him lower than middle of B tier. However, his glaring weaknesses do the exact same thing, preventing me from placing him any higher. Next up, let's talk about a really weird mystic. It's Marie Lambeau. I've heard people say that her 4 book is a wasted stat that makes her really awkward, but I harshly disagree with that. I actually think of her as a true flex investigator that uses mystic assets to fight, and her book skill at base to find clues in the dead space, using seeker assets to boost up her book. And I think she's actually pretty damn effective when you play her like that. A big reason I like this method of building Marie is because you use Doom allies, Arcane Initiate and David Renfield, and then you can calling in favors them out of the board to get your Seeker ally assets into play from your deck and to reuse these allies, the Doom ones I mean, once the agenda has progressed and you're safe to use them again. The deck just flows really smoothly when you build it like that, and I think it's just reliable and strong enough that it deserves to be in the upper parts of B tier. However, while Marie Lambeau is much more interesting, Akachi is just doing the same thing every other Mystic does, but a little bit more of it. Akachi is just these baseline Mystics, but more of it. She has 5 head, not 4. She has 1 more charge on all her assets. Her card pool doesn't really add much of anything to her. She's just a 5 head Mystic with more charges, and as dreadfully boring as that is, it's good enough to get to the top of B tier. Moving on to A tier, we're now talking about the investigators that are just good. And I do mean just good. Because there are a lot of Cluevers left, and many of them break the game in some way. The A tier investigators don't have glaring weaknesses, and they are strong. And the only reason they get outshined is because of just how many investigators are genuinely broken within the Cluever category. And to start this off, I'm going to actually put up 3 investigators at the same time who largely fall into similar roles performed very differently. Safina Rousseau, Bob Jenkins, and Carolyn Fern. Carolyn Fern turns off horror, Bob Jenkins gives you soak, Safina Rousseau can run 9 copies of Word of Protection, which is more than you should ever need to be safe. Let's talk about them in a little bit more detail though. Safina Rousseau and Bob Jenkins are both big money green Cluevers, but they have insanely different decks. Safina Rousseau is obviously wholly reliant on events to do broken things. Safina's quite strong, but I think that inherent variance to her that makes her sort of unpredictable in how she's going to perform in a game makes me rate her at the bottom of the A tier. Bob Jenkins is just sort of a generic big money green Cluever, because honestly, big money green doesn't have many level 0 cards it cares about running. Honestly, the only level 0 green cards that really matter for Bob Jenkins for a big money deck are Intel Report and Falsian Bargain, and he's got 5 splash, he can take all 4 of those. The reason I rate Carolyn Fern the highest of them, though, is because, in no small part, because she has Dynamite Understick to the plan. That's not me joking or meaning. The fact that your Cluever has guaranteed fast action access to 3 AoE testless damage is really strong. Also really strong, Safina's going to protect you from the Mythos deck to a degree. Bob Jenkins is going to give you an amount of soak that's pretty good. Carolyn Fern just passively turns off horror. You can run Pete Sylvester, the Ancient Stones that aren't Knowledge of the Elders, the other one, the Horror one, and Solemn Vow on Carolyn Fern, and as long as your teammates are occasionally in the same location to you, they should have never died to horror. You don't have to commit a single action to it past the initial setup. And the initial setup is only 2 assets because Solemn Vow is fast. I do think as a Cluever, Carolyn Fern is slightly weaker than Bob, especially in the late game. However, I think earlier on she's a stronger Cluever, and I think that she has a much more inherently powerful effect than what Bob or Safina are doing. Earlier, we were talking about skids, and I said that I was rating Ginny higher than Anna, even though I described parallel skids as essentially being a better Ginny. That seems obviously wrong, so why is Ginny ranked higher? It's because of her signature asset, or more accurately, her alternative signature asset, the Green Man Medallion. Big Money is a deck that scales incredibly well with experience. This is actually just generally true of rogues as a whole, but Big Money especially. You can build a 100 experience Big Money deck. I know because I did it in Path to Carcosa with Ginny Barnes. 38 of that experience was from buying cards strictly with the Green Man Medallion. I bought a double-double for one experience in the first scenario. I got a Black Fan for free in the second one. There's a lot of campaigns where your first two scenarios don't even give you that much, and if you did get those two cards, it would be everything you got. But the Green Man Medallion allows Ginny Barnes to turn her deck online into a fully complete Big Money deck very quickly. It also just gives her an ungodly amount of experience that just breaks the difficulty curve of the game. And at this point, having established that I think Big Money Green is pushed super hard, I mean, it has 4 copies of Ward of Protection, it gets to ignore the Mythos deck with Well Connected, and it has Intel Reports, and it has Leo DeLuca and Gios and a hand slot with the Black Fan. Why on earth is Ginny not at the top of my S tier is a question you might ask yourself. And if this was a tier list that was only about the 8th scenario in a campaign, Ginny Barnes would be the highest ranked character on that tier list. No, I'm not trolling. However, the first half of a campaign exists. And more importantly, the first 2 scenarios exist. And in those first 2 scenarios, really, every single scenario where you use the Green Man Medallion, it's a detriment to you. But in those first 2, when you're still weak and the Green Man Medallion really hasn't given you anything to make up for the fact that it is causing you to hemorrhage money, because Ginny Barnes using the Green Man Medallion is losing a resource a turn. She's not gaining 2. She is actually the worst Big Money character when you're doing this meta-scaling nonsense with the Green Man Medallion. But the insane amount of free experience it gets her lets her do genuinely broken shit as long as you can claw your way through the first 2 scenarios. I got through the first 2 scenarios in Path to Carcosa with Ginny Barnes as my main Cluever. I'm not sure I could have done that in a harder campaign. I don't know if she could have cracked all the locations with the deck I have. However, as always, when a character is bad, they get to rely on the same old defense. I'm a flex character. Because if Ginny Barnes doesn't have to get all the clues herself, if she can just reliably get some clues throughout the course of a scenario, but doesn't have to do all of the work as the third character, and you just run some events that help you deal with enemies, and call yourself flex, it completely solves that worry. So yeah, Ginny Barnes does some genuinely broken things because she capitalizes well on the Big Money archetype, and the Green Man Medallion is just a fundamentally broken meta-scaling card. On the other hand, let's talk about Finn Edwards, who wants to run basically the exact same deck, but the more reasonable 50 experience version of it instead of the 100 experience deck that Ginny ends up with. Finn Edwards has a good stat line and a good ability in Scenario 1. His card pool is terrible, but as is so often the case, 5 Seeker cards is really good. Seekers have pretty damn good cards, and 5 of them is more than most people get. So yeah, his card pool is awful, but it could be a lot worse. What's possibly more upsetting is that his weakness is very genuinely dangerous, and that his abilities, or his signature cards rather, he has 2 of them, both suck. There are no illicit cards that I really feel the need to run in a Finn Edwards Cluever deck, including his signature gun, so I basically just have 2 blank cards in my deck when I play Finn Edwards. But his stat line and his ability are good. 1 head, 7 sanity sucks. But as I've established repeatedly, Big Money solves that problem. He'll be fine. And he has access to 5 Seeker cards. He can run some Seeker allies that have some sanity soak. He wants to anyway, because Milan's going to be getting him book and money. At the end of the day, Finn Edwards might be a lot weaker than Ginny Barnes in the final scenario, because he's building like 2/3 of the deck that she is. But he's a whole lot stronger in the first 2 scenarios, and he's more than strong enough at every point of the campaign. Next up, I want to talk about another support type of character, Min Fan. Min is really good. She basically just has 2 full card pools because there are so few red cards above 2 experience. Admittedly, here I am assuming that you have spent a little bit of experience and had a few turns to set up, and it's like scenario 2 or later. But her ability does just say, somebody on your team is going to pass their Mythos skill test this turn. You can just throw a 4 question mark Essence of the Dream at whoever has a dangerous skill check every single turn. And then you get to draw a card for it, no matter where they were. So once you get to the point where Minty Fan is reliably setting that up, that's really, really strong support. And unlike these other support characters, she's a full-fledged Seeker. She's actually really damn good at finding clues because all Seekers are. But her ability on its own is really just skills give 1 more question mark. That's it. Her signature asset's great, but her ability does very little. And as a consequence, she's one of the weaker Seekers. She's still quite good, but Minty Fan's really not one of the better Seekers, and there are a couple of reasons why. The first one is, yes, she does get access to the entire Survivor card pool, more or less. And honestly, I don't think it adds that many powerful abilities to her. You can try to build jank stuff with scavenging. You can try to recur Necronomicons and Ice Picks. There are a lot of cards available to you that all look good, but you can build a 40-card Seeker deck and be like, what do I cut here? With only neutral cards and yellow cards. And the fact is that there are not that many Survivor cards that actually impact her deck building meaningfully. Her ability doesn't actually do that much. Her signature asset's awesome, but her ability is just 1 more question mark when you commit a skill, more or less. And at the end of the day, she's still good, but there's a lot more broken that Seeker can do than what Minty Fan does. So let's talk about a character where I'm surprised how well I'm ranking them. I hadn't played Ashcan Pete until I played him through the website of Dream Eaters very recently. I always knew he was reliable, but I played him after Edge of the Earth came out, and I ran him with my 5 flex cards just being Milan, Kirby, and Forced Learning. I used Forced Learning as my main source of draw to cycle through my cards, and then I ran all of the discard clue finding events. My first upgrades were Charismas and Granny Orns, and then I quickly got Ice Picks so I could do Scavenging Recursion shenanigans. At level 0, that deck was a little bit rough. But we won with all victory, with Ashcan Pete as the primary Cluever, and I auto-failed Rotting Remains twice, killing Duke about halfway through the scenario. That's like catastrophically bad variance, and we still got 100% completion in that scenario. And every scenario after that, I was just blown away by how strong Ashcan Pete actually is. The free move that is attached to Duke's Investigate check gives you so many actions over the course of a game. It's pretty much always going to give you at least 1 action on every turn, and frequently you will want to discard a card and move again, and discard a card for a move action is an insane thing that Ashcan Pete can do with his Investigator card. If you stack enough static book boost, then you can just get clues even when Duke is offline. You have +5 to your book with those 3 allies I mentioned in play, and since you hard mulligan for them and you draw 2 cards a turn, it's not that hard to find them. And then as the scenario goes on, the longer and longer it goes on, the better Ashcan gets at finding clues, because you just keep playing winging it from your discard pile and putting more and more density of winging it into your remaining deck when they cycle back in. And you can run Fortuitous Discovery, and it actually works because you're just discarding the first one. Ashcan Pete just blew me away with how good he is with Forced Learning and a pile of book boost. He, I think, more than any other investigator from Dunwich, is completely made by his 5 flex cards. If he didn't have the ability to run those 5 Seeker cards, I'd be like putting him mid to low B tier, to be honest. It would drastically affect how strong I think he is. So coming back to something I've said earlier, yeah, Ashcan Pete's really good. He gets 5 Seeker cards, and that's more than a lot of people. But no, really, what makes Ashcan Pete, and everyone knows this, is Duke. Duke is insanely strong. That free move is just worth so much, and I honestly considered placing Ashcan higher than this, but I couldn't do it. I don't feel like he should be an A+. That's it for the A tier. It's time to move on to A+. These characters aren't just good, they're incredible. Ashcan Pete struggles in Scenario 1. Without Charisma, he really struggles a little bit. But these A+ characters do not have clear, defined weaknesses like Ashcan does. And they are all excelling. If they have a niche they fill, it's not like Carolyn or Bob, where maybe your team just doesn't need the health you're giving them. It's always strong. So let's talk about a pair of characters that a lot of people might rank more highly: Stella Clark and Wendy Adams. Red has a problem. Survivor has this fundamental issue where they don't have that much access to action compression. Stella Clark and Wendy Adams are both two different variants of insanely reliable. They're not going to die. They're going to pass multiple skill checks a turn. They're going to carry their weight very consistently. They're absolutely incredible investigators. They will never be the reason you lose, and they will always do just a little bit more than their share. But until Ice Picks was printed, pretty much all Red Cluevers had was recurring sharp vision, and that's it as far as additional clues go. They were just investigating for one otherwise. And in terms of fighting, they're swinging for two. That's not relevant for Wendy, but Stella Clark is genuinely a true flex investigator. I only put her in the Cluever tier list because I feel like I have more cards in her deck about finding clues than about fighting. But honestly, whenever I play Stella Clark, it's like a 50-50 of hitting a dude with a meat cleaver or finding a clue. Or really, it's like a 33-33-33 between those two options and intentionally breaking a check with drawing thin for a free action and two cards, but that's not the point. Stella Clark's deck is slightly more heavily tilted towards Cluever, which is why I put her on this side of the tier list. That lack of real action compression that Red has. Aside from very few cards, they're really just getting one clue at a time or hitting for new damage, is why this insane degree of reliability only gets them to A+. I will say, however, that with Wendy Adams' access to cards like Easy Mark and Black Market to rapidly cycle through a deck, and then the ability to much more easily get to a point where she's recurring her ice picks with scavenging because she has so much better draw than Stella Clark, that actually makes Wendy Adams potentially underranked on my list. Because she might actually be a lot better than I'm giving her credit for, but I feel like these two characters both really just insanely reliably do about 25% more than you need them to do. And I think everyone above them is meaningfully carrying the team in a way that's more impressive than what they do. Also, when I was talking about Stella Clark, I remembered I wasn't clarifying why I put flex characters in certain spots. You could argue that Marie Lambeau and Akachi Onele are both flex characters, very easily, especially Marie, because I explicitly said that I view her as a true flex character. Or at least I hope I did, where you investigate with your book and you fight with your mystic assets and events. I honestly think it's just a coin toss where I put Marie. I could easily have put her in the other tier list, but I think she's better when you view her as a Cluever because of the fundamental problems that mystics face as fighters. They have bad movement, and they're bad at dealing 1 damage. So when you're fighting an enemy that has 1 health or a multiple of your damage plus 1, it's hard to kill it. And it's hard to follow your team around and make sure that they're safe. And it's hard to run away and kill something that spawned somewhere else that has horror on it, or doom rather. And because of all this, I view mystics as inherently tilted towards Cluevers, which is why Akachi, who has nothing about her that says Cluever or fighter, is in the Cluever tier list. As a Cluever, these weaknesses don't matter. Who cares what sorts of damage you deal? You're finding clues. And you don't need to be as mobile because the fact that you're finding clues in multiples of 2 or 3 makes up for your lack of mobility. But as a fighter, you were dealing the same damage as guns. Why were you bad at moving? So with that cleared up, let's move back to our A+ tier. I do want to reiterate that I honestly think I might be underrating Wendy Adams. I haven't played her with ice picks and black markets, and those probably are going to make a substantial difference, but I just don't know it's enough to get over the characters above her. Because Jacqueline Fine, it might push her over. But everyone after Jacqueline Fine starts being progressively more broken. Earlier, I mentioned that Akachi was the baseline mystic, but just a little bit more. Jacqueline Fine is the quintessential mystic, turned up to 11. She has 5 in her head, a powerful ability. That ability lets her use cards that would otherwise not be usable by most mystics, lets her mitigate the downsides of cards that all mystics use, gives her a degree of team utility that most mystics don't have. And before we start talking about who I think is better than Jacqueline and why, I want to point out that there might be a lot of yellow left in my candidates. When I said earlier that I rank Seekers very highly, I put them at the tippy top. Parallel Daisy and Joe Diamond pale in comparison to the rest of the class. Minty Fan is only stuck down in A tier because she needs to spend so much experience on things to reliably find her signature asset and her dream diary, which, since you can't tutor her signature asset, that's either a lot of draw events or a Mr. Rook, to actually consistently do the thing that Min wants to do. For almost every other character in the game to reliably live out that character's ideal is only going to take like 5 experience. You might not be doing it as well as you could, but you're doing what the character wants to do. But Minty Fan names like Dream Diary and a pair of Mr. Rooks reliably using analytical mind every turn in a meaningful way, and just takes so much more work to get going than most of the other Seekers who don't need either of those cards. But the Seekers left all do various different broken things. And a lot of the characters left that aren't Seekers benefit massively from their access to Seeker card pools. So let's move on. Let's talk about Monterey Jack. Monterey Jack is, again, a character held down by his early game. Scenario 8, his deck looks busted. Scenario 0, he is a one-head rogue with 7 brain, and he only gets 5 level 0 Seeker cards, so there's a lot left wanting in the early game for Monterey Jack. It is worth noting that, like most rogues, if you play any sort of big money deck, he's not afraid of dying at all. But also, since you're a Seeker with all the horror soak Seeker affords you, you really shouldn't ever be afraid of dying on Monterey Jack. And while I talk about Monterey Jack, I need to talk about a card combo that's going to come up again and again as we get to more powerful characters. Monterey Jack is able to run Ancient Stones, Knowledge of the Elders, and Occult Lexicon. Did you watch my Seeker video? Do you know where I'm going? I'm going to a place called 6 Teslas damage as 1 action, and you only spent 7 experience and 2 cards in your whole deck to be a flex fighter better than most actual fighters. See, just like the fighter tier list, once you're good enough at fighting, you don't really benefit more from killing dudes. You want to provide some other form of utility. If Monterey Jack is already finding all the clues on the map with 3 Doom to spare, and all the victory points acquired, I would much rather to have him be able to handle an enemy cascade if things go horrifically wrong than try to end the game 2 turns faster on average. And frankly, that's a disingenuous comparison. Because for 7 experience and 2 cards, you would not be ending the game 2 turns faster. Maybe 1 turn faster, but even that seems like a slight exaggeration to me. The amount of offensive power you get for so little investment when you can run that combo is ridiculous. But that requires a couple of things. It means your character can't require too much experience to get online, because this combo does cost 7 experience. It's delaying whatever you're doing. It requires you to have hand slots free, and a lot of characters, for various reasons, don't have the ability to use their hand slots on this. And the main reason that Monterey Jack is this low, despite just being really damn strong all around, is that he really needs experience. His level 0 green cards are not ideal for him at all, and he wants to rapidly upgrade out of all of that junk. So Monterey Jack could be a very high-ranked investigator, but I suspect his early game weighs him down a lot compared to the promise that his late game offers. Next, we have another investigator from Edge of the Earth. It's Norman Withers. Norman Withers is ridiculous. Deny Existence level 5 and Ward of Protection level 2 and a 5-book Seeker can get some work done. Norman Withers can use Astronomical Atlas and Liver to Iben to do a good impersonation of a handless Rex Murphy. He can very easily recur deduction every single turn. And 1 deduction a turn is, enough. I don't know how many deductions you need to win a game, but Norman Withers hits that threshold. The reason he's not higher is twofold, I think. The first is his lack of access to high-level Seeker cards really limits his ability to help out in combat. You don't want to run a bunch of brain boosts, and you don't want to be fighting at 6 with an upgraded Mystic asset. You would prefer to be doing something else as Norman Withers to help in combat, and his options just aren't that great. His lack of access to high-level Seeker cards really hurts him in his ability to help with combat when it comes to that. And simultaneously, because he's only a Seeker level 0, he doesn't actually get good mobility. He has a Mystic's mobility, which, as we've established, is terrible. Jacqueline Fine has bad mobility. It's part of why she's as low as she is, despite her intense strengths. The main thing Norman Withers is doing compared to a lot of other characters is providing Ward of Protection and being basically invincible to Deny Existence, while doing a really good job as a Seeker-style Cluever. But since most Seekers are relatively safe due to having good defensive stats and don't need to be literally invincible thanks to Deny Existence, it's really just the Ward of Protection, which I don't feel offsets his weaknesses. Next up, we have Daisy Walker. She also gets Ward of Protection. She also uses books to draw cards every turn. But instead of having a guaranteed deduction every turn, she's just trying to copy deductions with Practice Makes Perfect, but she can run the level 2 deductions. So who knows how many deductions Daisy Walker gets on average, but it's a lot of them, and it's enough of them. She's also able to run Cult Lexicon level 3, unlike Norn Withers, which makes her very, very good at dealing with enemies if she needs to. And she's able to run the broken Astounding Revelations. She has enough scry to manage that with Old Book of Lore and Research Librarians. So her economy is great, her consistency is great, she's really, really strong, and she's able to do all of that with a basically endless Pendant of the Queen due to Practice Makes Perfect and Enraptured. With Occult Lexicon level 3, with Water Protection level 2, she's just great. She's incredibly strong. I have no complaints whatsoever about Daisy Walker. And I may have gotten slightly ahead of myself. I left out somebody that I should have reviewed already. It's Ursula Downs. Ursula Downs is really solid. Her ability isn't quite a deduction every turn. You have to be able to reliably pass a skill check, and you aren't going to know the Shroud ahead of time a lot of the time. However, it does translate to a very large number of free clues over the course of a scenario. Her stat line is great. There is nothing bad about her stat line at all. It's unfortunate that her signature asset basically does nothing. The reason Ursula Downs gets to be placed this highly, because honestly, I would place her probably at the top of A tier above Ashcan, if it weren't for a couple of broken combos. One of them, I've already mentioned with Monterey Jack. She doesn't need her hand slots. She can use allies for book boost, and that means that she can use her hand slots to carry Ancient Stolen Knowledge of the Elders, Cult Lexicon level 3, and with 2 cards and 7 experience, your fighter never needs to be worried about getting swamped again. You can summon 2 bosses in 1 turn, and it's gonna be fine. But the other combo, and the thing that really helps her, it scales her up very well in the late game. I should mention that a part of the strengths of Ursula as I view her is that she can take Shiren's Obel. A lot of people probably don't agree with just automatically taking Shiren's Obel when it's available. I probably shouldn't either, but that is how I behave. Regardless of how I feel about Shiren's Obel, I pretty much always first buy get it. So she just has 10 more experience on other Seekers, and she can use some of that to use a combo only available to 2 characters in the game. She can use the Red Clock, she only has access to the level 2 version, but that's fine, to generate 1 charge every turn. She's going to let it get up to 3 charges so it gets her an action, and then instead of letting it reset normally, she uses Eldritch Sophist to take all the new charges off of it and put it onto Pendant of the Queen. So now her Pendant of the Queen is infinite, and she has Leo DeLuca and a necklace slot. When you're playing a Cluever with like 7 book, extra actions is insanely valuable. Speaking of, Pendant of the Queen is just broken, and having infinite charges on it is broken as well. The reason Ursula is not higher on the tier list, because what I'm describing is insane. She's good enough early in hyperscales like this, and she has extra experience, and the deck's not even that expensive. The big problem for Ursula is she doesn't have a draw built into her character. A lot of Seekers do. I think most of them might actually. I can't remember the exact numbers. But regardless, without any draw built into her character, she doesn't quite have enough draw to reliably do all the broken shit she wants to do. She's a little bit more prone to variance, she comes online slower, and it really holds her back from being genuinely broken. And my last character in A+ tier, a character that I frankly want to rate higher, is Gloria Goldberg. Gloria's stat line is great at 4/5, but because of the way her ability works, you almost always want to run a deck that is going to reliably and quickly find Alyssa Graham, so that your stat line becomes 5/5 and your ability just becomes look at the top 2 cards of the Mythos deck. You may discard or put one of them under, you put the other one back, or you may put them back in any order. And there's no cost, it's just a lightning bolt you get every turn. And the main problem with this is it's prone to variance. The first time I ever played Gloria Goldberg, in scenario 1 of Innsmouth, I didn't draw her until the scenario was over. They were both in the bottom 4 cards of my deck or something. In scenario 2, both times I saw Surge into Locked Door or Surge into Obscuring Fog. And then the 3rd or 4th card were like Crypt Chills. And I am not exaggerating. They hit Silas, whose only asset was a Time Worn brand, and Trish, whose only asset was Leo DeLuca, and they both failed. So right now, maybe I'm underranking her due to bad variance and bad memories. But I feel like she really doesn't have the ability to super reliably protect her teammates. She absolutely destroys the Mythos deck. It is so much less threatening with her in the game, but to say that it is non-threatening is just wrong if you're playing with 3 or more players. However, on top of just really seriously messing up the Mythos deck, she's incredibly strong. She can investigate using book and fight with Mystic assets just like Marie can. The difference is that her numbers are just much higher than Marie's are. Rather than playing with Doom and progressing the agenda deck faster, she's just turning off the Mythos deck, which is so much more valuable. than potentially getting one action a turn. Gloria is fantastic. She is, I think, the strongest I could ever accept a character being without saying they needed to be nerfed. Which is what we need to start talking about when we come into our S tier. S tier characters are the characters that aren't just exceptionally powerful, but genuinely game-breaking. And all of these characters, in some way or another, are game-breaking. Some of them are game-breaking in very direct ways. They're just too damn strong. They're not doing anything complicated. I'm looking at you, Rex. And other characters are doing unimaginably complicated things that take forever and you don't want to play with them. Because if they're going to show you up, the least they could do is do it quickly. But all of these characters are doing something broken as hell. And the least broken of them, by a substantial margin, but still clearly broken, is Luke Robinson. I said that Jacqueline Fine was a mystic turned up to 11. But she's still a mystic. Her weaknesses are all the same. She's just got the strengths turned up to 11. Luke Robinson is a completely standard mystic. Like, comparing the card draw he gets from yellow and his base stats, you're not looking at something that much different from Jim Culver, really, in that regard. But he gets more yellow cards than Jim does. And that matters. It gives him more freedom with what he does with them. And he has the gate box. So even though he's the baseline for how a mystic performs as a mystic, he's taken their weaknesses and turned them into strengths. He's got pretty damn close to full access to Seeker's card draw. Mystics suck at card draw. It's supposed to be a weakness in the class. They clearly have the least mobility options of any class. And Gatebox is not just a mobility option. Luke Robinson is the single most mobile character in the game. Hunter enemies don't know what to do when they're in a game with Luke Robinson because they will walk over to him. He's alone in a room, and before they attack him, there's a player window, and he just teleports into the gate box. Luke Robinson can just spend one action to essentially free evade a hunter enemy at no risk, and then teleport to another location. There's not much more to say about Luke Robinson than that. He's not an insanely powerful mystic. He's a standard mystic that just forgot to have weaknesses and instead has them as his strengths. He's devoid of weakness as a consequence, incredibly consistent, super mobile, able to do all the mystic shit that everyone else does. He's incredible. Next up, let's talk about Trish Scarborough. Trish is the other character that can run the combo of the Red Clock, Eldritch Sophist, and Pendant of the Queen alongside Ursula. Unlike Ursula, Trish's ability is insane. That's about the same amount of hoops to jump through as Ursula, but the difference is how it interacts with things. How it turns Working a Hunch into an automatic evade of an enemy. How it turns Pendant of the Queen's ability to evade an enemy into the ability to evade an enemy and gain a clue. And on top of that, rather than being limited to mono yellow, she gets all the good parts of yellow. She doesn't get the broken damage, unfortunately. She does get a lot of its draw, a lot of its clue finding power, its crazy ally assets. She gets the insane bundle of big money power cards that Green has access to. I said in the fighter video, there were only really 3 characters that used big money Green to augment their strengths instead of as a shield for their weaknesses. It's Trish, Tony, and Finn. But Finn is a much weaker character than Trish by default. Trish has so much more innate power than Finn. Her ability is so much better. Her card pool is so much better. And when you have a big money Trish online with like 7 actions a turn because the red clock never turns off and neither does the black fan and neither does Leo Leluca, and she has 6 in her book and she has $1 million that she can spend on turning off the Mythos deck or finding clues or whatever else she wants. And like, yeah, that's the broken in-game dream for big money Green that I'm talking about, but the whole journey to that is powerful for Trish. There's never a point where she's weak, never a point where she's really that scared of her bad head score. But that bad head score is why she's this low on the list. That and one other thing. It's a minor point. Trish has the best enemy management in the game. She can just evade enemies for free forever. It's not hard for her to do. However, she can't kill enemies for shit. If you need to kill a victory point enemy, Trish can't help you with that. But she will increase its health by whatever the player multiplier is. And that's unfortunate. It's minor, it's not a big deal, but but the fact that she's only delaying problems instead of just outright killing them is a minor point against her that keeps her closer to the bottom of the S tier. I wonder how many people have been watching me thin down the candidates list, just waiting and waiting and waiting and still wondering why the hell Harvey Walters is still here. So let's talk about Harvey Walters. I'm going to make a video about this specifically, just this one specific card interaction. Have you ever considered Bulletproof Vest and Harvey Walters? Harvey Walters' weakness is terrifying. People consider doing crazy stuff like running Versatile and Deny Existence to draw it less and then maybe mitigate it when it does happen if they draw in the right order. Instead, though, you could just let it go off. The way I play Harvey is I don't run anything to support Big Hand. You get there naturally with only like 1 or 2 consistent assets, such as a Grizzly Totem 3 or the World Tarot card. And then his ability and his signature gives you 2 draws a turn. You don't need to run draw to enable a Big Hand archetype in Harvey. With only 1 repeated draw asset in the form of a Grizzly Totem and 2 Deep Knowledges, you can easily sustain double Farsights and use both of them every turn. And when you draw your weakness, your hand size is 10. You've only got your signature asset for hand size increasing. It deals 1 for 3, so you should never take more than 4 damage. And between a Bulletproof Vest and 2 health ally soak like Jeremiah Kirby or Mr. Rook, you just don't need to be afraid of it. So his weakness doesn't stop him from running big hand stuff. And he's able to run the big hand stuff without actually filling his deck with bad draw cards that he doesn't want. Because that's the problem with big hand, is you have to go through this massive setup process where you get all the garbage in your deck into your hand, and then all you draw is the good cards. And Harvey doesn't have that part. He just has the good cards. He just has setup cards and assets and the payoffs and events. He doesn't need to draw through his own draw cards and waste his time. Oh, and also he's able to run both Ancient Stones and Occult Lexicon 3 in his hand slots, just so that we're clear about that. He does also kill everyone. And because he's a big hand deck, he'll never be short of money or cards to trigger the blood rights. He just easily has both of those covered. The only reason, and I do genuinely mean the only reason, that Harvey is not at the top of my S tier is because he can't meaningfully abuse Pendant of the Queen. He gets 3 charges from it, that's it. And don't get me wrong, 3 charges of Pendant of the Queen is absolutely insane. It's one of the best cards in the game. It's egregiously imbalanced. But these other 3 characters, much like Daisy, are able to get a whole lot more than 3 charges. Unlike Daisy, though, these other 3 characters are not filling their hands with books. That's not true. Amanda Sharp is also filling her hands with books. So let's talk about Amanda Sharp and why she's better than Daisy. Amanda Sharp is absolutely ludicrously strong. She's able to reliably cycle her deck faster than anyone else. And once she does, she's able to reliably, very quickly draw her cryptic researches, or cryptic writing, sorry, to gain money, and then play out the Red Gloved Man to have base 6s in all her stats and be immortal because she's repeatedly playing 4/4 of Soak every turn. It doesn't matter that the Red Gloved Man is going to go away, you'll have him back real soon. So yeah, she's worse at killing people by a substantial margin than these other 3 in the top 4. However, the degree to which she can find clues, committing deduction level 2 4 times in a given turn, several times a scenario, with a base book of at least 6, she's one of the fastest Cluevers in the game. She's completely unkillable. You can't get through this many Red Gloved Men. She's insanely consistent. She deals some amount of damage. Who cares? She doesn't even need to at that point because she finds so many clues, but she can still run Occult Lexicon if you want her to help with that. Oh, and amongst the many cards she can duplicate under her, it's not just Unrelenting and Perception level 2 and Deduction. It's Enraptured. So if you do need charges on your Pendulum the Queen, go ahead, refill it. Use a cryptographic cipher or an Eon chart to investigate 4 or 5 times in a turn, and then fine. Your Pendulum the Queen's online for the rest of the game. Good luck. Amanda Sharp is disgustingly strong. So, 2 last characters, what order do they go in? I imagine a lot of people came to this tier list wondering which of these 2 was at the top and not whether or not one of them was at the top. And the answer is, unfortunately, Mandy is at the top. I've went back and forth on these 2 a lot. Without Taboo, it's easily Rex Murphy. Mandy's deck gets a lot cheaper, but Rex's ability is just completely broken without Taboo. With Taboo, though, Mandy's deck like a mandatory 8 experience spend as your first buys for Mr. Rook sucks. It's terrible. I hate it. But the flip side is once you've bought Mr. Rook's, a Pendant of the Queen, and a Charisma, 12 experience, Mandy is pretty much fully online. From that point, everything else is bells and whistles. It's like Norman Withers, how once you've bought your Astronomical Atlas, just the first one, just 3 XP, it's like, all right, time to go. I'm a different character now. And that's how Mandy Thompson is with their first 12 experience. They are tremendously meaningful. And both of these characters are strong out of the gate. Mandy Thompson might not be capitalizing on her ability, but she's still a 5-book Seeker with 3/3 defensive stats. Ultimately, I think the main reason I rank Mandy higher is just because she's more consistently able to do the broken shit in later scenarios. It's only in scenario 1 and 2 that Rex is going to beat Mandy. I suppose that depends. What I should say is that when you have less than a 9 experience, Rex is substantially stronger than Mandy. And then once that flips, they even out a little bit. Pretty much completely in my eyes. And then as you get more and more experience, Mandy Thompson's ability to reliably draw through her deck faster than Rex starts pulling her further and further ahead. I think just barely over the course of a campaign, Mandy is a better character than Rex, but it is so close. And Rex is downright oppressively strong in scenario 1. Oh, and of course, in my eyes, both of these characters are optimally ran with Occult Lexicon and Ancient Stones, because of course they are. So this is my final tier list for the Seekers. Let's go back over it one more time. At the bottom, we've got Lola Hayes. I don't feel the need to elaborate on that. In C tier, we have our relatively subpar characters. They're not bad, they're viable, but there's not a good reason to pick them. We've got some baseline mystics that really do nothing special. We've got Patrice, where once you get through her gimmick, you're just really reliably carrying your weight, and that's not worth the gimmick that she has to build around to do this. Parallel Daisy is a disgrace to the original Daisy. They took away her brain stat, her head stat, her purple card pool, her yellow card pool, and they gave her an Astronomical Atlas, but she is not Norman Withers. She's still playable, she's still okay, but why would you pick her over the original Daisy ever? Joe Diamond is because he's a 4-book Seeker with 2 in his defensive stats. And the Hunch deck allows you to do cool stuff where you fill it with draw cards to reliably turn yourself into a big hand deck. Honestly, in scenario 1, he might even be worse than Parallel Daisy. They're pretty close, but I think he's a much better character later in a campaign than Parallel Daisy is. Parallel Agnes and Parallel Skids both have their own problems. Parallel Skids is called having Skids' stat line. That's pretty much the whole summary of what's wrong with him. With Agnes Baker, though, it's that her ability, despite seeming really cool and like it has a lot of incredibly abusable tricks to it, she really just lacks the draw to capitalize on. And if there was ever a draw printed for her or something that I'm missing to give her a draw engine, it's possible she could skyrocket up the tier list, but she's just not there right now. Preston Fairmont. There's only so high on a tier list you can get when you're just abusing the shit out of Lola's ability. Marie Lambeau and Akachi are both just good mystics. They're not interesting. Well, Marie's interesting. Akachi's not interesting and Marie's not particularly powerful, but they're both good enough to get the job done quite consistently. In our A tier, we have some genuinely good investigators that have clear reasons to pick them over other people. We have a variety of characters that help support their team with Safina, Bob, and Carolyn. They all do it in different ways, and they all go about finding clues in different ways as well, but their role within the team of these 3 characters is actually very similar. Jenny Barnes, despite being an A tier, is a character that, if I were ranking her on her original assets, would probably be here. She'd be a lot lower. She'd be probably the top of C tier. Because her original asset just does nothing. The guns are useless. Even if you make Fighter Jenny, and you shouldn't, the guns are still bad. Finn Edwards is just doing what Jenny does, but he's actually good in the first 2 scenarios, and then he's still more than good enough despite being short on experience compared to her in the rest of the campaign. Min is another character providing support to her team, but unlike the previous 3, she's really good at finding clues because she's a Seeker. Ashcan Pete is hard carried by Duke. You get a free move action every turn, and on top of that free move action, you can discard a card for another Lightning Bolt move action. He's really, really good. That action compression is so valuable. And I almost feel bad for not putting him higher on the tier list, but I really can't in good conscience put him above Stella or Wendy or Jacqueline. And I would never put him anywhere over Daisy. So I think this is probably where he belongs. Stella and Wendy are sort of the limit of what fair characters can do. But they're so reliably doing it that I don't put them with the rest of the characters where they're still fair. This is the point where things start getting unfair as A+. And they might be doing normal things, but they're doing it with such reliability that Wendy and Stella are genuinely unfair. Jacqueline Fine is largely the same boat, just the purple edition, and purple is, in my eyes, a little bit stronger than red. Monterey Jack is a janky nightmare of like what would have been a really powerful Seeker or a really powerful Rogue, but instead he's stuck in the middle of the two, and his deck just has this awful transitory period at the beginning when it's not really doing either of them right. Despite that, he's incredibly strong. I think he's one of the best characters in the game. It's just he's held back by his opening deck and how you upgrade it over the first couple of scenarios. Ursula Downs is a character that's just good. It just has access to a lot of broken things, but lacks the draw to do all of it immediately, and ends up just being really strong, but a little bit prone to variance. And Norman Withers marks sort of a power gap in this tier list, where, yes, these three are still an A+ with the rest of them, but they're not quite at the same level. Norman Withers, Daisy Walker, and Gloria Goldberg are all providing meaningfully more team utility than everyone here except Jacqueline, but they're also doing it with great other abilities. Norman and Daisy find clues like madmen. Norman's literally invincible. Gloria Goldberg is fantastic. You can build her as True Flex, as Hard Cluever, it doesn't matter. Either way, I put her in the exact same place on this tier list because of just how badly she can defang a Mythos deck. Coming into S tier, we have Luke Robinson doing his best to break campaigns with his ability to teleport. He's a mystic with all of their weaknesses turned into the strengths, and as it turns out, that's just a broken thing to do. Trish is just an incredibly strong, big money Cluever with access to all the consistency and clue finding power of 0 to 2 Seeker, and that's real good. And then we have a variety of powerful Seekers. Harvey Walters abuses Farsight with minimal investment. He is relatively safe from his weakness with minimal investment. He just has massive built-in draw engine, and that draw engine can give him loads of money because you can fast action events with your Farsight to turn emergency caches into fast actions. You can draw a cryptic writings and play it as a fast action, and when you're done with all of that, you can use your clue finding events as fast actions. He just finds so many clues, draws through so much, does so much work, and then uses the broken Seeker combo, Occult Lexicon level 3, Ancient Stones level 4, kills everything. The fact there are characters above him on the tier list is just sad, because there really shouldn't be. He should be the line where things got too broken, but Amanda Sharp draws her deck faster than him, finds clues faster than him, is actually unkillable because of the Red Gloved Man, and is able to play more deductions than anyone else. She can still contribute damage to the Occult Lexicon level 3, she's not stopped from doing that. Amanda Sharp really should be the top of my S tier, shouldn't it? Her scenario 1 is weak. The only reason Amanda Sharp is not the top of S tier is because scenario 1 is weak. Scenarios 2 and 3, you're still not going to be there. If we were judging strictly by the second half of the campaign, Amanda Sharp would be the top of my S tier. And likewise, Rex would be the tippy top of this S tier if we were judging just by scenario 1. Because Rex's ability is just a deduction every turn. His card pool is only 5 splash, but that's fine. As we established with Harvey, mono yellow is good enough. 5 splash is great. The entire S tier is just genuinely busted, but Mandy Thompson's the biggest offender. The taboo list helps a lot. Before the taboo list with Mr. Rook in your level 0 deck, Mandy Thompson was egregiously the most powerful character, because at that point in time, Rex had already been tabooed, and Mandy Thompson just had Mr. Rooks on the word go. But now that Mr. Rook has been up to 4 experience, she's not as far ahead of these other top characters as she used to be. But she is still, in my eyes, the strongest character. I think this tier list is a little bit less controversial than the previous one in terms of things that I've ranked, but there are some characters that I think a lot of people will disagree with. Ranking Jenny Barnes this high, ranking these 3 high is right, but with this many people above them, I think they'll disagreed with. I think a lot of people don't think Harvey is as good as I do, and I'm gonna have to make some videos about Harvey. God, this guy is ridiculous. I don't agree at all with putting Harvey in the B tier, and I see it all the time. But that's it for now. I've got nothing left to add. If you liked the video, then like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.